here. And but other than that, actually a lot of the changes in 0913 are optimizations, refactoring, bug fixes, and most importantly, a lot of metrics and instrumentation we put in place for the long proposal times problem that we were investigating. So that's what is in 0913. And we're continuing with the current sprint, the sprint 37. So the focus has remained resolving the long proposal times. And now we have a solution to it. I think Greg is going to talk more to that. So I'll skip that for now. And then we are continuing to implement the items in cost accounting. All the items are ticketed and assigned as of now. So work is continuing on those. Casper tests, the work is continuing on that. As well as validator slashing tests. And then the peak merge, progress has been made in peak merge, and I'll talk to that in a little bit with the detail below, as well as off-chain observability of deploy results. This is a replacement API for listen for data at name. And then the increasing activity to prepare for launch in terms of improving or planning the hardening and reliability increases, as well as the mainnet infrastructure. So I mentioned last time that we started implementing some tasks on the hardening of the network, so that's continuing. Now we have asked all the teams to identify anything that they recognize as potentially hindering launch. So both to identify hardening opportunities in the modules they're working on, as well as any other tasks or concerns that they might have. So the first iteration of the planning is in process. The Genesis Vault creation issue, all the issues, as far as we know, are resolved right now, and those are released. They're available in the current release. I already talked to cost accounting being implemented. The synchrony constraints work, the actual implementation work is beginning, and the design part was completed. Greg will speak more to it. And the Rolang, replacing the registry with the Rolang-based registry, that's the peak and replay issues in peak, and all of that is proceeding. And the implementation of the API for DAG discovery and block discovery to replace the data at name. So those are the tickets there that you're able to see. The work on validator rotation in a non-gameable random fashion, that's continuing. And we started work on the multi-sig vault features. There are a bunch of tickets there that you can see. So that's work that has been started just now. And the testing part we already spoke to. There are a couple of requirements from the community, I guess, as they did the testing for API. One is for type-safe results in the gRPC API. And the second one is a request for a WebSocket interface for light clients. So we're evaluating to see what's feasible to do, because the first one, changing the current API, would cause rework in different places in the tests that we're running in the Pi, RChain API, and a few other places. So we want to be cautious of not creating rework right now without getting to feature completeness. But we are evaluating to see what we may be able to make available in these areas, and trying to figure out a calendar for that. So that's kind of where we are. Everything else basically is ongoing, both the refactoring as well as the technical options and planning for the ROC to Rev conversion, and to be able to enable wallets and other third parties to be able to offer Rev. So that's work that's ongoing, the design and conversations and things like that. So that's what I have in terms of the technical update. But the big part of, I guess, the effort is the synchrony constraints that Greg can speak to. But before I hand over to Greg, does anybody have any questions? Okay, if not, Greg, it's over to you.
Thank you, Rao. That was a great update. I really appreciate that. I'm actually really encouraged to see all of the progress, especially on the refactoring of the access to the node, having something that's a little bit more reliable in terms of the observable changes or updates to the data store, rather than what we had with the listen for data at name is a big improvement. And I think, for example, a wallet application would definitely benefit from having a more reliable view of how the store has been updated. So that's a big win. And I'm also really encouraged by how things have taken shape with respect to the long proposed times and how that relates to liveness. Again, it's sort of like the RChain magic happening. There was just a lot of synchronicity. A lot of things came together. So with the just so that people understand what the problem is, so we had Sebastian give a description with some of the data last week, and then we wanted to make sure that we could reproduce that data. So from last Wednesday through to Monday, we worked on creating the conditions whereby we could reliably reproduce what was going on, which gave us a good sense that we were, confident as to what was the cause of the behavior. I'll give a brief description of what the cause of the behavior is. I talked about it in the Casper stand-up, and if you want a really in-depth description, Christian Williams and Isaac Dufresne and I gave about an hour-long talk this morning for the RCast. So that gives a really in-depth description and gives some connections to the literature and how our employment of the theory helps us resolve the problem. So the issue is that even if all the validators have the same profile, so they have the same compute characteristics, they have the same bandwidth access, and they have the same storage capability, one validator can sort of rabbit ahead or pull ahead of the other validators, because which means that you end up with it's a liveness condition. It means the network is not actually live and secure, because there's only one validator that's really proposing blocks, and all of the other ones are essentially keeping up with the one that's pulled out in front of all the other ones. And the issue is that there's a slight unfairness. If you allow for a validator to justify the blocks they're proposing in terms of other blocks that they have proposed, then they can sort of get this head start. And the way the head start begins is a client deploys some code to run. The validator runs that code and then replays that code and then proposes the block to the rest of the network. So under certain conditions, the other validators are dealing with that block proposal rather than handling client requests. And so they then get further and further behind because the validator that proposed has already done that work. So for it, that work is in its past. And so it can take the next client request and propose more blocks, and the situation can get worse. The proposal times can lengthen and lengthen because there's essentially no all the other validators are in catch-up mode rather than handling client deployments. So that's the nature of the problem. Let me just stop there and make sure that everyone understands what I just said. Any questions about that? Okay. So moving on then, you'll notice, so just in case people need to be reminded, the sort of one of the main features of Casper is that the blocks that are communicated with justifications. So a justification for a block is really just a pointer to another block that preceded it. So or some set of blocks that preceded it. So essentially the parents. And then this forms a DAG, right? Because each of those blocks that are the justifications of a particular block also have justifications, and so on recursively. So you get a directed acyclic graph by starting from a particular block as your root, and then looking at its justifications and the justifications of the justifications, and so on until you get back to Genesis. So what will happen in the rabbiting behavior is that the rabbit's justifications are in fact blocks that were produced by the rabbit, and those justifications are in fact blocks produced by the rabbit, and so on for some long chain of proposals. And so you could change the nature of the this behavior by insisting that the format of a good block, a block that is sort of well justified, has a kind of alternation where a particular proposer, the justification includes other validators. And in fact, what you really want is other validators of that give you enough stake. So I won't go into the details, but essentially it's a kind of alternation. So if you think of the proposer as the player in a game, and all the other validators are effectively the environment or the opponent, then what you're really looking for is the shape of a game that sort of looks like player, opponent, player, opponent. And what that will do is that will force the validator to wait until it has enough justification from its environment before it proceeds. So that will necessarily slow it down. Now there's some things about the initial conditions. So if every validator has to wait for justification from the other validators, they're deadlocked. So there's a trick for getting around that. You don't want it to have to wait for too many validators because that could also lead to liveness issues. But if you wait for, say, on the order of a third of the total stake, that's not a bad measure to begin with, and you can adjust those parameters. More generally, so that good alternation shape is easy to recognize and easy to implement, but it's part of a more general solution, and that general solution maps onto the discussions that I gave back in the spring on programmable liveness for Casper. So all of this sort of backs all the way back into the theory, which allows us to have nice equational proofs of the correctness of these kinds of approaches. So the important point is that rather than sort of roll out the theory first, we gave sort of a minimal implementation. We waited for liveness to rear its ugly head. When it did, and we were convinced that it was a liveness issue, then we roll out the smallest version of the theory that resolves the problem. And as we start to see more, more subtle liveness issues, we have this entire toolkit of programmable liveness that allows us to address this. But the nice thing is that we're tuning it. We don't want a sort of one-size-fits-all solution to liveness, because that ends up having sort of ham-fisted trade-offs. And we want to tune the network's performance so that we can squeeze the most out of it in terms of bandwidth and other kinds of characteristics. So that's why we're taking that approach. And so again, it's making sure we have a theory that has good shape and good form, right? So it's equational. It has it's built on this notion of bisimulation, connected to a notion of types, all of that goodness. But then we can draw the line from the theory all the way down to, here's a practical issue that we were facing. We saw it, all the engineers documented it, and here's the solution that rests on the theory. So so this is what we mean when we talk about RChain being based upon a correct by construction methodology. Any questions about that? An enthusiastic crowd. I'll be here all week.
Thanks for the explanation, though, Greg. That was good.
Oh, good. I'm glad. So moving on then, if there are no other, to me, this stuff is why I get out of bed in the morning. This is beautiful, wonderful stuff, and for me, it's exciting, and I think for a lot of the engineers, this kind of stuff is really fun too. But moving on from there, we have some business items to talk to. Does someone else want to talk to what's going on with the AGM, the annual general members meeting, and give an update on the board candidates that we have received?
I can jump in.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so tomorrow, Thursday, we have meetings for the Co-op's Governance Committee and Nominating Committee. Nominating Committee has received 5 applicants for prospective board members, and the committee will be vetting those candidates, doing the background checks, reference checks, credit checks, etc., and passing along those recommendations up to the board. The annual meeting is scheduled for Thursday, October 24th, and we're now looking around for alternative spaces for where that meeting can be held. And in the most recent newsletter that was sent out, there was a request, kind of an RSVP, that people who are seriously interested in attending the meeting reply to info@RChain Co-op and let us know. We're just trying to get a basic head count before we book the space. So anything else? Any questions about the meeting or the nominating process? Okay, back to you, Greg.
Awesome. Let's see. So I just want to say that we are, just to give hints for the closed door session, that we are in talks with some fairly high profile exchanges who are interested in listing the rev and staking nodes. So this is a part of our an overall strategy to make sure that we get enough nodes outside of the co-op, being run by distinct parties. So this way we can bootstrap a wider network. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that is burning that we need to talk about here. I think that's it. I think that's all that's necessary.
Maybe maybe a reminder about ROC, which you might have on exchanges or in multi-sig wallets.
Thank you. Yes, that's right. So if you remember, the ROC to Rev swap requires as we have said since February of 2018, you need to be in control of your private key. So if it's in an exchange wallet, that doesn't count. Or if it's in a multi-sig or other smart contract, we can't see into those balances, so we won't be able to do ROC to Rev swap for you. So you need to have it in essentially an individual. You need your ROC to be an individual wallet, the private key of which you control. And we are working on solutions that will make things a little easier for people. But for now, this is the safest and best best practice. So because it leaves no exposure for any individual and no exposure for the co-op. So that's the thing. And so what we'll be doing in the very, very close future is announcing a block height at which the transactions beyond that will not be counted in the ROC to Rev swap. So we're also in the process of beginning to inform the exchanges about that, so that they'll have the opportunity to alert their customers, their clients, and take steps like freezing trade or whatever. We it's really important that people get ROC into wallets that they control the private key of.
Hey, Greg, I just posted a link to our official Rev issuance for ROC holder webpage. Mm-hmm. And just also want to remind people that that is the official process and information from the co-op. So if you hear somebody else say something different, please make sure you go and check it against this page and avoid being scammed.
Yes. Okay. So unless there's any other things that people want to talk about, that's it for this week.
Hey, Greg, can we just mention real quick, just remind everybody, we're still looking for a technical documentation specialist, and we're also looking for a lead SRE, ideally located in the Americas or the region of Asia, Japan, China, just trying to get more coverage in different parts of the world. And so if anybody's interested or knows somebody who's interested, it's been posted in the announcements page on Discord. You can also find it on Indeed, or they can just simply send a resume to jobs@rchain.coop.
Great. Thank you for that. All right, onward and upward.